Audit and Methodology Review. This morning we will be sharing our upcoming audit methodology, providing attendees the ability to better understand how they can maximize their online trust score. I should note that this webinar will be recorded, and we will be providing an opportunity for question and answers at the end of the call. Joining me today is Jeff Wilbur. Jeff is the Vice President of Marketing from Iconics. He's also the Chairman of the Online Trust Alliance Board of Directors and has been very much involved with the honor roll for the last 6 or 7 years. So Jeff, thanks for joining the call today. We'll be having a dialogue back and forth, providing context to the overall program. For those of you who are new to OTA and new to this webinar, just take a very quick moment to share a little bit more about you. The Online Trust Alliance, we're a 501c3 organization, and our mission is very clear. It's to really enhance online trust and at the same time promote the innovation and vitality of the marketplace. And we do that by advancing best practices, by working in public-private partnerships, and also by developing best practices and managing and monitoring adoption. And the Online Trust Audit is an example of that. It builds off of a multi-stakeholder process that started in November of this year of looking at the methodology and key criteria, and then it looks at measurements of adoption and then highlights those companies that have stepped up and are taking best practices in the security and privacy side. Overall, our goal as an organization and of the honor roll is to move from a compliance mindset, a compliance as a regulatory or legal mindset, to really stewardship. What is the best thing for consumers and the industry long term? And we do that in the honor roll by recognizing those companies. We only list those companies that have exceeded and made a cutoff, which is typically at 80% or better of the core points. And we use that as an incentive for businesses to really focus on data and privacy by design. And you'll see that as we go through the different criteria and how we develop that. And again, ultimately, what we're really excited is what we have seen over the years is companies have really leveraged this as part of their branding. Twitter, American Greetings, Publishers Clearinghouse, really are key examples, WebMD and others, that really have made this a part of their brand's value proposition, how trust is really important to their consumers. So that's kind of the overview of who we are and what the honor roll is. Let me kind of drill down, and we'll go into a lot of the specifics here. But when we look at trust, we think of 3 pillars. What are you doing to protect your brand and your company from abuse and from consumers being perhaps phished or confused by malicious third parties purporting to be from your brand? What are you doing in security? From a data protection perspective, the data you collect, how are you securing it? Is it secure in transit? Is it secure in your site? How secure is your servers? We look at all those areas. And then we look at privacy. We look at privacy from multiple dimensions as well. We look at your privacy policy. This year we'll be examining, actually it says over 800, probably closer to 1,000 sites this year. We actually review those sites' privacy policies, we score them, and then, then we actually map out to what can we observe that's happening on that site. And all these things that we do, by the way, are from using commonly available tools that are out there that anyone, your competition, cyber criminals, or regulatory agencies could easily use to assess what was going on your site. So that provides us, again, the 3 pillars, the brand protection, security, and privacy. We look at segments and we identify them and we cross-tab results. And we've been doing this for several years. We look at the top 100 banks, the top 500 internet retailers. Last year, 2 years ago, we added a social category. And social is not just Twitter and Facebook, but it's also dating sites, it's storage sites. It's really, think of it as a category that is non-content, in other words, non-news, and non-e-commerce and non-banking. We thought it's very important to have that category. Last year we introduced a news and media category, and these are content sites that are only promoting, and this would be like Wall Street Journal and others are there. We look at the federal government as well, and we have some interesting updates to share on that, and our own members. And then new to this year, we have introduced a new category called the IoT 50, and this is the leading 50 sites in home automation and wearable technologies. As we're looking ahead, what is this category doing? What are these startups doing? How focused on security and privacy are they? So that's the overview of the categories. When we add everything up, we also, last year we introduced 150 sites in Australia and New Zealand. So again, trying to provide a comprehensive view here. Jeff, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered it well. I guess we at each of these categories we either draw from a list that's defined by a third party, or we look at the top consumer-facing sites in each category. So, for instance, the federal government sites, we look at the consumer-facing elements of those, not just the large organizations of the government.
That's a key point. We in the case of federal government, we also, at the request of the White House about 4 years ago, we actually expanded to include all cabinet-level agencies. We also overlay that with data on known government sites that have past phishing exploits. So, for example, passport.gov, irs.gov, again, so on there. So we look at that. So that's not an absolute ranking. Others, we also bring in Alexa data and others. It's not something, the question just came up, how can I get my site added to that, to one of these lists? This isn't an opt-in mechanism. With the exception, we do include everyone who's a member. So if you're not on one of those lists and you want to be audited, the easiest way to become a member of OTA. So thanks for the question there. Conversely, another question is, how can I opt out? You can't opt out. We are using, again, as an audit, it's a totally independent, anonymous audit. We are evaluating the data. We only share the data with the actual entity itself, and we only list companies that make the honor roll and above and beyond. So that's really important. We do make best attempts when we notice a significant vulnerability to try to contact that company that we've noticed something in our testing. And that's just from a responsible role that we believe we have if we see something out there. But again, we don't disclose that to anyone, including government agencies and such. So that's a little bit of our analysis of our segments. And then in general, each segment has up to 100 points in each category. So again, the brand protection, security, and privacy, if you think about that, that would be 300 points, 100 points each. And if we use the benchmark of the past at 80%, you'd have to get a base score of 240 or greater. There's bonus points and there's penalty points. There's bonus points for emerging best practices, which we'll get into, and there's also demerits or penalty points for other areas. We've also had this criteria, and it may change based on when we normalize the data, that you have to score a minimum in each category. And last year it was 55. There is a possibility that number could also increase this year. And again, just like in college, can be some sliding scales. Each year, all these criteria, the bar continues to go up higher. So you'll see that as we go through this. Let's go to the next slide here. Jeff, do you want to kind of share a little bit of, this gives a 3-year view of some of the segments?
Sure. This is looking at what percent of the organizations or companies in each sector made the honor roll over the last 3 years. So you can see that roughly a third of the Internet Retailer 100, so those are the larger ones, made it, a quarter of the Internet Retailer 500, and so forth. About half the Social 50 OTA members are higher. You would expect that. We want to walk the talk. And then the news category, which Craig said was new last year, had a very low honor roll rate. And there were some reasons for that were common across most of the news and media media sites. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to add it. So you'll see one more this year, which will be the Internet of Things category. And one thing to point out on that sector is that we're not trying to assess the security and protection of the devices themselves. It's the companies who make the devices. Are they practicing the best practices that any company could do? And because we really can't see inside those devices at this point to assess them.
Yeah, key point. On the news site, I want to outline. So news is primarily media sites. That could be the Wall Street Journal, could be New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, those type of sites there. What we found in general, they had very weak security, and in many cases, because they maybe weren't doing e-commerce per se, but they still were registering people, registering users, getting profiles. Security clearly was not like you expected in the banking sector. The other one was the privacy side. They also scored in some areas very low. And that's because they rely on advertising, and some of the privacy policies were very broad, that they shared data with all third parties. They had no retention policy. They did not have clear boundaries of how data was being used. They may have been participating in some self-regulatory programs, but as we know, some of those programs really don't address those issues. Those self-regulatory programs they participate in only provide the ability of someone opting out of receiving an interest-based ad. It has nothing to do with the data collection and data sharing that actually occurs. And so that's why you see the news category so low in this report here. So let's give you the top, the headlines here. As I mentioned, we try to identify the best. So last year, last 2 years, we looked at the 500 retailers, who were the top 10. And so it's very interesting seeing the companies out here. American Greetings, one of our own members, scored #1 for a second year in a row. Obviously, that's a company that's recognized and is very vested in these challenges here. What's interesting, though, is just companies like, for example, on the right side, Books A Million. I believe they're ranked number 486 or so. So they're at the very bottom of the top 500 e-commerce sites. And obviously, you see Amazon and others here at times. But what that really told us is that the objectives and the criteria that we have put forth is not just something that the very largest, such as Walmart, can obtain, but it's achievable by others. Now, obviously, you have Sony up here. I just see a question that came in. This year, for example, Sony would get negative points due to their breach. So that certainly could bring them down in that area as well. So it's a dynamic landscape there. And then the #1 overall retailer, I should say #1 across all sites, was Twitter. And Twitter has been a catalyst, has been very aggressive in raising the bar each year. So kudos for all those companies there. Jeff, here, you want to kind of provide a little more perspective into different segments here and what we're sharing here on the average scores by segment?
Sure. This is a summary of last year's scores in those 3 pillars that Craig talked about, the domain brand, the site security, and privacy. And this is based on a 100-point scale in each one. And you can see the different segments and the different colors. And you can see there's quite a bit of variation in the domain and brand. And we're going to drill into each one of these categories as to what the criteria are. That's the widest ranging one, really. The server and SSL is fairly consistent across the sectors, and then privacy does have some variation as well. So this is something we look at both, across sectors and then across the different categories of who's following the best practices and what can be done to improve that adoption. So here's the first of the 3, brand protection. This one mainly revolves around email. The questions that we're trying to address here are underneath the Venn diagram there. Can the website be spoofed easily by someone? And that largely has to deal with email spoofing or domain locking. So if we look at the base points here, several years they've been pretty similar. We're looking at the core email authentication standards, SPF and Deacon, and if you adopt those methods at both the top-level domain of a company and subdomains that are used for email, you'll score the maximum amount of points. And then a few years ago, we added DMARC, which sits on top of SPF and Deacon and gives some additional protection. We added it as part of the base points. It started as bonus points when it was new, and then it has now become kind of a baseline best practice. And that's what we do with everything. We look at kind of emerging best practices. They start as bonus points, and then after enough time has gone by for everyone to adopt, they become part of the baseline. So the bar keeps moving up over time. So this year for bonus points, we'll be looking at two things. One is TLS for email, and we have a slide on TLS, but it essentially encrypts your transmission of messages between mail servers so they aren't sent in the clear. This is an evolving, it's been around for quite a while, but being adopted more and more. So you'll get bonus points for that, and also we're putting extra weight on DMARC reject policy, meaning messages that fail authentication would actually be rejected by the recipient. And that's an extra layer of protection, so we're gonna put extra bonus points there. Penalty points would be as if you don't lock your domain, and that's just a real easy check to look for in a who-is record. And if you don't lock your domain, that means someone can grab it, which is a negative thing.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I think it's, again, and we'll go into some of the stuff with TLS on there. And I should note there is some discussion on the bonus points on the DMARC reject policy, if that should actually, and one or two things we're looking at, increasing the weighting on the bonus points for that, or possibly move that into the core baseline points. So those core baseline points that we talked about are that 100 points possibility. So we're still evaluating that point there. So we have a few slides here. These are more for backup, and certainly we're happy to take any questions at the end of what email authentication does. But basically, there's two approaches that Jeff mentioned, SPF and Deacon. We believe complementary. They support each other and address different edge cases, and very important process here. But effectively, it allows an ISP or a corporate network to validate if that mail is spoofed or forged. And if it's coming from the domain that's purporting to send the domain. A real key concern there. And the way these works, SPF, like I said, looks at the path of the message. Deacon looks at an encrypted method, and then DMARC overlays on top of them, and provides the receiving network a policy to actually adhere to should they reject or quarantine that mail. So it's very important, very easy to do, and there's some very easy tools to see if that's available. And as I mentioned, that there's tools that anyone can use. We have a tool on our site here. If you just go to the OTAalliance.org site, you can search for it. Here's the record here, or the URL. But basically, you can type in any domain you wanted to, and into the box here, you see it's the radio button is marked for SPF Records. You could do that. Here's an example that we took some of the sites into the record for the social segment, and we ran a query, and we get the results back. And all we're doing is we're pinging the DNS and looking for a record, and this is the response that DNS has given us back. So this is, again, a good example of what's out there in the public domain, what anyone can look at, as well as the cyber criminals can look at in there. So lots of tools out there. This is how you do it for an SPF record. In the case of DMARC, I'm sorry here. This is, here we go back into DMARC records. I was thinking all that stuff, but never, that's how you would do that. I want to touch on transport layer security. I want to give kudos to Google and Yahoo and Microsoft who have implemented what's called opportunistic TLS for email, and basically it's, as Jeff mentioned, it's encrypting email between servers, and that's really ability to enhance the security and privacy. It helps to prevent unauthorized snooping of that mail, whether it is a coffee shop or government agency or third party. Very easy to do, low impact in there, and again, if anyone is using, for example, Google Mail, Office 365, it's all by default right now. So it's this is today is bonus points. We're looking at that, and if anyone's interested in starting to follow up, one of our committees is working on this very closely, and we have a lot of resources to provide and help people in this area. I'm going to talk a little about infrastructure security. The second pillar, again, what we are looking at is how secure is that server, what is the state of the SSL implementation, as also what is the configuration of the types of certificates you're using. And we also have a lot of data that comes to us by some of our data partners and member companies such as SiteLock, Distill Networks, High Tech Bridge, Microsoft, Symantec, that also does a service for us and scans these sites for other vulnerabilities. And obviously, if we find a vulnerability on that site, we actually apply a negative score to those areas. And we'll go into each one of these here. One of the things that comes up over and over every year is companies have lost track of maintaining their sites. And literally, there are new vulnerabilities that come up weekly. In fact, last week, there was something called the Freak exploit. And prior to that, we've had Poodle, we've had other things. Last year, Heartbleed. So the point is sites need to really be focusing on maintaining their security. It's not to do it once and walk away with it. And I'll just give you an example of a tool that we use here. We believe that OTA needs to walk the talk. So this was, as of last Friday, our assessment of using one of the tools, a company called Qualys SSL Labs. We have a customized API that we work with. Some of our members, Global Sign, for example, DigiCert and Symantec, help run some of the analysis for us here. So this is a very good tool. It's sslabs.com. I encourage you to go there. The link is on the slide. And it can provide you a great deal of telemetry into your server configuration. The 4 bullet points on the left are new for this year. So this is a good example of what was yesterday's standards. May have been sufficient, but today, again, we're in a new world. Jeff, do you have anything you want to add on that?
No, not really. I mean, this category, I guess, is probably the best example of the bar being raised over time because there are so many moving parts in the security area with the different protocols and such. And so each year, something that is that was kind of a new thing then becomes part of a baseline the next year.
I'm sorry about that. I just realized I'll mute for a minute or two here. This point here is really key. Again, as I mentioned here, you need to be looking at this. And the point that I was just saying is that the cyber criminals can use these tools very readily. And one of the concerns you should be thinking about is whenever these new vulnerabilities are announced, you can be certain that they're using these tools to identify and target high-value sites to see if they've implemented a patch or not. And as our data analysis did last year, or I should say in January this year in our breach report, over 90% of breaches could have been prevented. And one of the big issues is companies that have not had a program of patch management. In other words, a vulnerability was announced, a patch was made available, but the companies did not adopt it. And so here's a good example of a lot of the issues, known issues of weak signatures in the SHA-1 versus SHA-2, freak exploits, and different areas of vulnerability. So highly encourage you to consider this here. And again, I see a few questions. I reached out before Neil from SiteLock, who's done a lot of work on the botnet analysis, but also the malware and malicious links. Neil, I don't know if you can hear me, but do you have any comments to add to this?
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay, I thought I was on. No, I think this covers it in terms of what we're going to be. Well, from our perspective, obviously, we're looking for any kind of links to places where malicious content would be distributed as well, which sometimes can be hiding on websites, especially those websites that allow user-generated content. So we see it on those areas quite a bit as well. So something to look for as well.
Well, great. Thank you. And it's a good example of the data we get back from Neil and other companies. We only get back 0 or 1s. We want to be very cautious of the amount of information we collect as well. But again, we make best efforts if we see a significant vulnerability to reach out. One of the challenges that we have, honestly, is quite often we don't have context with some of these companies, and all too often our mails go to a junk mailboxes in a sense here. So the lesson learned there is to make sure that your companies have a vehicle or a process if people in the security community detect vulnerabilities that want to do responsible disclosures, and how do they reach you. Let's talk about some of the enhanced SSL criteria. We mentioned some of these last year. This is kind of last year's slide here, but again, a good example of how the bar continually is raised each year here. Always on SSL is one that's pretty exciting for us right now. We worked with Akamai, Symantec, Digicert, and some others about 5 years ago, really trying to bring the promise of what's called always on SSL or HTTPS everywhere to the mainstream. And the whole idea was to basically encrypt the entire web session from the client device to the website. Similar in effect to TLS for email, of encrypting the data traffic of that email between servers. Always on SSL was really about originally being promoted because of the what we call the evil twin hotspots, or the hotspots that you were connecting to that were actually collecting data, looking at the entire web session, and again the risk of that. And we've seen that more and more. I think today we see a bigger issue on the security and the privacy side, and more and more companies have adopted. So pretty much most of your social sites, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, are forced always on SSL or HTTPS connection. Many of your banks are as well. So really encourage you to think about it. It's really relatively easy to do. Does not have a major impact on session, or I should say system overhead, but it's really important to do this, and not just your site where you're logging onto, but it's really your entire site. And to that point, I'm really happy to announce that this week the FTC has adopted by default, and this is really important. They also have shared the importance of really having a secure connection. We've been working with them, and then also the White House as of Tuesday of this week, also has done the same. So they really are seeing this as really important. And those of you that are concerned about others snooping into your privacy, HTTPS by default is a significant step to help address those issues. And Jeff, any comment? Or I see Mike Hammer, you're on the call. You're welcome to provide any insights onto Always On SSL and the importance of that and the value it provides. And I should notice, if you go to our site, you'll see if you type in www or you just type in our domain name, it will force that connection to an HTTPS connection. You'll see in our case we have an extended validation certificate, so we get bonus points for that as well. We're at the cusp of deciding should HTTPS be part of the core score this year. Most likely we won't do it, but I can tell you next year it would be part of the default scoring mechanism now that we've seen widespread use here. So I encourage you to go back to your dev teams to think about that. This is not a major issue. It's basically a registry change and a few things in your certificate to force that connection. One other point that I did not bring up earlier in the slide, we talked about types of certificate. There's domain validation and there's different types of certificates. We're going to be putting more scoring and positive points on what's called OV certificates that can be validated against the organization, and that's primarily because what we see in something known as DV certificates that have been fraudulently obtained. So that's another area that we're actually increasing points and scoring for. I see a question here that was asked here, a great question. A great question regarding some issues specific to the health insurance exchanges and such here. And that is one thing that we are looking at changing for this year and add to the federal site. It's such a great question. Right now we're looking at the federal ones. It is a question, a great question. Do we go out and do the health care for all the states? And that's a great question. It's on our plate, and ambitiously like to do that, but at the very least we're going to make sure the federal health care, Obamacare sites are on. So, okay, so great questions here. Let's go back to the next slide here is privacy. Next section, I should say. And privacy is, again, we believe a core foundation of security, trust, and consumer confidence online. And one thing that I'd say is we're seeing this more of this crossover between is something a security practice or a privacy practice. And again, the Always On SSL has a tremendous area that actually is privacy enhancing as well as security enhancing. The TLS, again, another area of, again, privacy enhancing as well. So we see all these areas that are combining. What we do on the site is we evaluate the actual privacy policy. We look at several areas. We look at how clear there's a privacy policy, specifically say what data is collected, what isn't, what's the retention practices, who is it shared with, how is it used, and other key factors. So we actually hand review those. We actually have some tools that help us, but ultimately we review each one of those. And then we compare that to what's actually observed from the site. And what we're looking at is what third parties are actually making calls during a session, and what do we know about those third parties, and then we correlate that back to the actual site's privacy policy. And that gives us 100 points capability. We're very fortunate that's powered by a few companies, Disconnect, one of our members, Trustee, as well as AVG Technologies. They're giving us data in different areas, different parameters. We normalize that and come up with a score. Equally important is the importance of some other areas. If we believe transparency and notice is really important, it means that privacy policy needs to be comprehensible, needs to be discoverable. So we're very much an advocate of what we call layered privacy policies. Today, these are bonus points. In the future years, these will all, I would expect, most of these will become part of the base points. Bilingual policies is a bonus point. Again, while maybe you're an English site, if you recognize a certain percentage of your user base where if English is not the primary language, then you should think about, if you really want to make a privacy policy as comprehensible and user-friendly, think about it, put it in a different language. We have done that on our own site as Spanish, for example. Icons is really important. It's italics here because it's new this year. Additional bonus points. We aren't saying what icons or whose icons. We think that's very important. Do not track status is very important as well as tag management or privacy solutions. And tag management or privacy solutions we'll get into in a minute or two, but basically when we think about privacy and data collection, it's very hard to do it. And there's about 8 or 9 companies that have solutions in place to help manage all those tags, all the third-party calls that you or others have installed on a website. We're able to detect if those are present, and those sites that have them get additional bonus points. And then we have the negative points or the demerits if your whose information is private versus public, if you've had a known data breach settlement, or actually incident, or if you've had public FTC or state settlements. So again, combined, they help pull us all together. Do not track, obviously, is a controversial topic for many. The standard is evolving. It's unclear where it is going. But that said, the state of California, as of January 1st last year, requires a policy, privacy policy, to clearly disclose, do you support or not the do not track disclosure. So this is very important that we have. And the call to message here, it's you don't necessarily know where that consumer resides when they're accessing your site. So if they reside in California, it doesn't matter where you have a nexus, you have to comply with California disclosure. So that's why we put that in here. For those of you, again, there's a lot of debate on do not track. Happy to discuss on a separate call. The idea behind it in concept at this high strategic level is if a do not track flag was activated by the user, it would not limit to impact first-party data collection and usage. It would not impact analytics or measurement purposes, frequency capping in other areas, or fraud and security purposes. But unfortunately, the multi-stakeholder process on do not track has not been very effective for a whole range of issues. But I do want to kind of highlight a great example of a privacy policy. So I'm going to give a shout out to our friends at Publishers Clearinghouse. Thank you for this. But here's a good example. They went from over 4,000 word privacy policy that was written by multiple attorneys for clarity to really something very concise, short notice for 475 or so words. They added icons for clarity, and again, some good examples. Now, you could argue we should have a privacy policy of 300 words or 200 words. That's all achievable. But here's a good example of a company that was able to make a commitment and actually get their hands around this and come up with something very easy to understand. So, again, a shout out, Sal. Appreciate your help in this here and others in this area. Jeff, any other comments on privacy before we move forward?
No, I think you got it.
So where do we go from here? And then we want to take it up for questions here. So the next steps, in the next 30 days, I highly encourage everyone on the call to reach out to your own teams, review our methodology, reach out to us, either myself, Jeff Wilbur, or Scott Stein, see how we can help in these areas. Engage your teams. One of the things is this: if you expect the IT department or your privacy officer to handle the stuff, that's not a recipe for success. This takes a team approach to sit down and revalidate what you're doing. And our goal is now, between now and the next month, the next 5 weeks, before we start testing, is everyone on the call and everyone out there, every brand, can help optimize what they're doing. Now maybe this becomes the impetus to include the icons. Maybe it's the time to accelerate the deployment of a layered short notice. Clearly, weekly or monthly, you should be assessing your SSL and server configuration. It may be a time to rethink the type of certificate you have on your website, as mentioned earlier, where you can get bonus points. So this is the timeline that we're working through. It's very aggressive because, again, we will need every bit of those between May 4th and June 15th when we release the report for the analysis of all the data coming from. And as I shared, we have over a dozen companies that are providing resources and expertise to give us data, and then we have to then compile that, look at outliers and such. So that's the summary there. We do want to open it up for questions. And Jeff, do you have anything you want to add?
Not at this point.
So I do have a follow-up question is, why not do the every state healthcare site? And honestly, it's not that we don't want to do it. It's just a matter of challenge. It takes about, we've estimated close to 10 hours per site to do. So all of a sudden that becomes about, could be, 500 hours worth of work that we'd have to parse out. So one of the challenges is while we have APIs and tools from multiple companies, the analysis still takes a lot of different data. We'd have to go back to each one, ask for the data to come back to us, and such there. So we're trying to do as much as we can, and so we certainly like to do that. Another question was, shouldn't someone having a breach be an automatic disqualification for the honor roll? Great question. We've had that question before. I think it's really important that we don't victimize the victim. You can have the best security around and still have a breach event occur. And so we're trying to put that in balance. So right now, it's you get X amount of negative points if you've had a breach. If you had multiple breaches, you would get additional negative points, again, in the past 2 years. A company like Sony would get additional negative points, and probably, if all things were equal, I would surmise that they would not make the honor roll this year. So, but we're trying to be realistic, and we have to recognize that there are organized crimes, syndicates that are targeting brands out there every day, and we don't want to go after that. And some of these things take years. As we saw this week, the FBI in the Atlanta office announced the arrest of several criminals from Vietnam, Canada, and some other areas responsible for some of the major breaches 4 years ago. So these things take time. I apologize for my coughing here. Lots of other questions. Let me try to see, taking those here. One of the things here is answer the question is, other than protecting customers, what are the benefits of the honor roll? And that's a great thing. I think at the end of the day, there's two aspects. Is you're doing the right thing for your customers. It's helping you be in compliance from a regulatory standpoint, but it's also about part of your brand promise, your brand value proposition. And I think that's really important for people to understand. And I also know from several of the companies that have participated is provide a tremendous amount of a resource for the privacy and security champions to come back and have a dialogue within their company. And we talk about security and privacy by design, so we see that as a way of doing that. So I think tons of elements. I'll tell you, majority of companies that made the honor roll in the past have done press releases. We do provide a logo, but we're very careful. This is not a certification program. It is a slice in time. It's a 2-week period that we are evaluating sites, and as we know, anything can happen after we stop testing here. So again, I think many benefits across company, across your brand, across consumers. So I'm looking here. Another question is, why is not EV certs a requirement of a core score? A lot of questions on every year we go back to. We think EV is the best practice, extended validation SSL certificates. It helps validate and confirm that the entity is legally who they purport to be, and it provides a trust indicator in the browser via a green address bar or other green icons. But we also don't necessarily think that's for everyone, so that's why we make it a bonus point. We continually look at updating and the scores and weightings on all these areas here, and we certainly welcome feedback as well. Another question was, can you walk me back again against the methodology and how we got to where we are today? As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, this has been about a 5 or 6 year process of really having this robust composite weighted analysis. But we also continually ask for feedback, and we do that all during the year. We look at feedback that we receive. We have a call for public comments in November or December of each year. We go through a process. We have it on our site. We reach out on LinkedIn. We tweet about it. And so it's really been a very efficient process of getting best practices out there. The one caveat is it can't be proprietary. It has to be open standards. It has to be something that you can assess from the outside. Jeff, that's all the questions I have right now. If anyone else has a question, feel free to do that, or if anyone wants to join the call, I can certainly take them off the mic right now. But right now, again, our goal here is very clear. We want everyone to maximize their score. We want to really show best practices. And another benefit that, we also want to come back and show to the press and the media and government agencies that leading companies are committed to security and privacy best practices. For more information, you can go visit us on the site. We have several areas on our site. We will be linking this webinar, but the URL is otalliance.org/honor roll. There's a tremendous amount of information up there. Always on SSL, email off, data breach, there's privacy practices. Encourage you to visit that. Call us, email us, and again, we're here to help, and want to thank everyone for joining the call here. So that concludes the call today. And again, thank you for joining us, and good luck on your attaining the honor roll status for your site. Thank you.